This nation was founded on the principle that all men are created equal.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men
are
created equal.
I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear.
Created equal.
Welcome to Created Equal. I'm Stephen Henderson at WDET in Detroit, and I'm in the studio with the show's producer, Kerry Jr. the second.
I feel like I'm like the show's curveball now. I throw things at you every now and then to see how you react on
Just
the
to
mic.
see what I'm going to say.
To see what you're going to say, man.
That's okay. That's a good role. So, Kerry, I'm going to start with a question. How old were you when they built the Renaissance Center? Were you born?
I don't think. Wasn't it born in the 70s?
It's in the late 70s.
No.
It opens like 81, I think.
I was not around.
You were not born.
No, I wasn't born when the Renaissance Center was built. I was around when GM moved into the Renaissance Center, but not when it was built.
Okay, that's like in 2000, I think. So I was born a few years before the RenCen was built. And one of my clearest memories is either in kindergarten or first grade, we went on a field trip to watch them construct the RenCen. We stood on the roof of Kalea Hall, that parking deck that is on top of the convention center, and looked east and watched these gargantuan cranes. Moving things around and building the structure. And I remember so clearly there was a woman from the city there with us talking to us about what was happening, and she said something I don't think I'll ever forget. She said, things have been going really, really badly for us in Detroit for a while, and this building marks the sort of transition to better times. Things are going to be better when the Renaissance is finished.
A Detroit Renaissance, I should say, was on the horizon. They felt when it was built.
I mean, I was 5 or maybe 6. I absolutely believed her. I was like, that's the thing, right? This is the thing that's going to turn it around. So, I think no matter who you talk to in Detroit, they have some memory like that of the RenCen that it defines the skyline for us. It defines the riverfront for us, and has for the entire time it's been there. So the idea of rethinking it, I don't know, it gets people in their feelings a little bit. Yeah,
I mean, the news that broke about GM moving out of the Renaissance Center and into the Hudson's Detroit development has been a shocking one. I mean, we saw that Hudson's Detroit development going up and thinking this is the second pillar of downtown skyline to the Renaissance Center. And now it kind of just begs the question of what's going to happen next. Just a little bit of background. I mean, we all know that GM announced that move, but GM has plans, they say, to redevelop the Renaissance Center. And they plan on, when they transition into the Hudson development, to be there for 15 years. That's what their lease says, for 15 years in that new Hudson development. And they're moving staff. Even some staff from Warren are going to be moving into that development downtown. And now that Renaissance Center is missing its chief main tenant, and we're going to see kind of what they do with it. There's been talk about the office space being renovated. But when you talk about the memories of the Renaissance Center, for me as a child, it was, I think it was a restaurant at the very top of the building. Every Halloween or so, we would go up there for like this Halloween party. They have candy sprawled out on the table. They have like performers, and we would wear costumes. It was so much fun. It was probably the peak Halloween experience because going outside in Detroit is too cold. So we were indoors. We did like a little trick-or-treating. We did the costumes.
I don't remember that being a thing at the top of the RenCen. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
It was a great memory for me. So hopefully we'll see some renewed spirit into what the Renaissance Center will be going forward for the new generation of kids. But right now, we got to talk about what the potential future is going to be.
Yeah. So we want to talk about what's going to go on the riverfront, on the site of the RenCen when GM moves out and moves to the Hudson's Tower. We've got 2 great guests to guide us through this conversation. Harriet Saperstein is an urban consultant and community activist. She is a retired city planner, really a legendary retired city planner, somebody whose name is very familiar to those of us who've covered Detroit for a long time. She's going to talk to us about the kind of role, the social and architectural role, really, that the RenCen plays in all of our lives, and how we should be thinking about the riverfront and areas around it. We've also got Kalea Hall with us. She's an automotive reporter for the Detroit News. She covers GM, and she talked with CEO Mary Barra this week about the move away from the RenCen.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get started.
Yeah.
Harriet and Kaylee, welcome to Created Equal. It's great to have you both here.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is Kaylee.
So, Kaylee, I do want to start with you. You spoke with Mary Barra yesterday, and your story published today in the news, and it highlighted something that seems to be plaguing in Detroit and Michigan's future prospects, talent. Talk about what you learned about GM's future here in Detroit and in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, well, one of the main things that CEO Mary Barra told me is that, they're proud to call Detroit home, and they intend to continue to call Detroit home. But at the same time, like many other companies, they're reimagining what their headquarters space is, right? So for me, it wasn't surprising that they decided to move out of the RenCen. I mean, we've seen since the pandemic, if you ever have gone inside the RenCen since then, it's there are fewer people for sure. I remember going in back in I remember going back in there in 2019, and it was filled with people, and then going in there earlier this year, just very empty, especially in that food court area. So for me, it wasn't surprising. Things have just shifted for corporations. They don't need these, massive structures like that to really, call home. And not only that, GM has a sprawling campus at Warren where, I think more than 20,000 people work. And they've shifted a lot of their sales and marketing team. They work alongside the engineers and designers, which makes sense, right? You want those folks to be on the ground, seeing the product come to life. So when it comes time to sell it, they know this backstory of how it came to life, right? But so it's not surprising to me that they've made that decision, and I think partnering with Bedrock, with Dan Gilbert, to try to think of what's next for the RenCen makes sense. But Mary indicated, they're going to continue to call Detroit home. And they're proud of that.
That's pretty important because I remember not too long ago having a conversation with somebody who was talking about how much of the GM staff and employees were moving to Warren, and the fear was that the move out of the RenCen, which everyone seemed, as you point out, it seemed to be predicting, might be out of Detroit, right, to Warren, and that everybody would be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have thought that, right? And you can see if you've driven past their campus in Warren, that's where a lot of the products come to life, right? But they still, as far as right now, they still want to have a Detroit, being in the center of the city like that is very appealing. And when we talk about this need to build this knowledge-based economy, well, how do you do that? Well, you bring future potential employees to places like vibrant, creative, areas where they can really see themselves enjoying themselves. And downtown Detroit has really, it really does that, and when I go downtown, it's great to be around and see it bustling and have lunch and, do something after work down there. So you need vibrant cities. And I think that's what I still want to make sure they have a downtown presence. Yeah. So they can bring employees to see that. But also, they have their campus in Warren, which itself is like a city.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the particulars here. GM owns the Renaissance Center. How much space was it occupying there, and how much space will it occupy in the new Bedrock Tower? But also, how much space, I guess, is empty as a result of GM leaving? And it's not just GM, right? There's some other vacancies there at the RenCen. So give us a sense of what this does to kind of the office space picture downtown.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I knew the specifics of how much they were really occupying. What I will tell you is that when we were, my colleague Chad Levengood in December, he reported that I think at the time GM had like 1,000 employees they were reporting at the RenCen. That was like a 67% drop from the pre-pandemic time. So that's pretty significant, right? And I don't know how many employees will be working out of the Hudsons, but what I can tell you is they're going to like the 2 top floors is what we reported previously. Mm-hmm. So you're going from a giant building that is the RenCen and you're going to that that space. So there's no question that it's like downsized, right? I don't know what the future holds for the RenCen. I think many people think for a space like that it's got to, like everything, it's got to be multi-use, right? Mm-hmm. So retail, office space, maybe some apartments. But I would say just walking through there, it's been pretty vacant.
Yeah, it feels very vacant.
Few years.
Yeah,
yeah,
it does. Did Mary Barra give you any hint about what she thinks will happen or should happen with the RenCen? Did she talk about ideas? Did she talk about strategy? Again, they own that structure. I assume they're not going to sell it. Is there any peek into their thinking here?
No, I mean, she didn't really provide those specifics at this stage. I think it's pretty early, right? They're going to take the next year and work with Dan Gilbert's team and the city and probably the state to think about that. But she did say, she's excited for the future and she's excited to be part of the Hudson site. So I think it's just we have to, again, when you look at what's been done over the years with buildings like this, it's usually like a multi-use situation. So mm-hmm. I would think that that's what they're evaluating at this point.
Yeah. So Harriet Saperstein, I want to bring you into the conversation as well. You're, as I said, a notable planner here in the city of Detroit and someone who has paid close attention, especially to what we do with the riverfront and our space there. I want to get your reaction to what's happening with the RenCen and what you think it ought to be inspiring in our minds right now.
Good morning. Am I on?
You are. You are.
Okay. Thank you. This made me research some of the stuff that I had been writing and looking at for many years in an annual letter. Uh-huh. I don't really know. I'm not surprised about GM because the place and Renaissance Center has just seemed empty and vacant for quite some time. You would go in there and feel like already that it was a ghost tower. But we're starting with a terrible architecture. I've got to say that Portman's design, which he's done in other cities as well, mm-hmm. was always designed to be internal. He didn't care at all about how people got in and out. Mm-hmm. He didn't care at all about how the buildings he built related to the rest of the community. But it has become an icon. If you stand, the picture that we show of Detroit tends to be the carousel on Cullen Plaza, which I love and mm-hmm. which represents much of the work I did, and then Renaissance Center in the past. And I've talked to some of my neighbors some say, let's get it down. It's awful. It's terrible. But it is an icon now of who we are. And it can't go down. And the question is, how do we reuse it? Yeah. How do we make it viable? I don't care about the 2 little towers. I think they could probably go down and give us a space. The crucial thing is how we keep the riverfront protected. Yeah. I will give GM credit. It's left the riverfront open, and it's helped us do the rest of it. Because the riverfront now is what's making Detroit both recognized and almost powerful in some respects in terms of how it draws people all over the place.
Yeah.
How do we connect that to downtown?
Right. So I want to ask you what you think of what was done with the RenCen. I mean, the original design, as you point out, was extremely unwelcoming. And I don't know that a lot of people even remember the big concrete structures that stood between the RenCen and Jefferson Avenue When they first built it, they were a part of the air conditioning, the HVAC system for the towers. But you couldn't even see the front door of the Renaissance from Jefferson without kind of straining. Those came down at some point, and then of course GM opened up the backside of the RenCen on the riverfront. It was built. I think this is a great irony. It was built on the river with no views really of the river in most of the lower part of the building. GM changed that and created that plaza. Do you feel like those changes, I guess, Harriet, make it a more important part of the riverfront than it was originally? I mean, when people say take it down, I think they're thinking of what it used to be, not maybe what it is now.
Yeah, you can't see me shaking my head yes as I agree with you.
Okay.
When they had those barriers in front, it was the example of how they were totally isolating themselves, both from the downtown and to some extent the riverfront, but they were crucial. And giving Matt Cullen, their key person, one of their key persons, time to be an important and essential part of the Riverfront Conservancy is why we have the Riverfront Riverwalk today, which makes Detroit, again, a very important both architectural and visual and functional city in the list of cities that we have. They were closing it off. That's all Portland ever wanted to do, and GM was happy with that. Ford left. GM at least stayed, but they closed themselves off. They were separate. I don't know how many people they'll take into that downtown little building. The Hudson site. You notice that when they were talking about what should we call that, there is no way anybody will call the site except anything else but the Hudson site.
Yeah.
The worst decision, one of the worst decisions was when they tore down the Hudson's building. Can you think of what we'd be like now if we still had the Hudson's building and all the different places and the different companies that would be in it? How that would have tied together the whole metropolitan area, both historically and realistically? That's one of the bad decisions that was made. So, to some extent, how do we work with GM, or how, shall we phrase it, GM work with us to make sure that their buildings stay functional and connect to the downtown and the metropolitan area through the riverfront connections and what we hope will be good connections downtown, not the transportation plans that they're talking about now. Yeah. That's another discussion.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation with Kalea Hall of the Detroit News and former city planner Harriet Saperstein about the Renaissance Center. What is next for it when GM moves out of it in 2025? We want to hear from you, our listeners, as well. Give us a call and let us know what you think about GM leaving the RenCen. What does that mean about the city's progress and its priorities? What does it mean for the riverfront that we've redeveloped so meticulously in the last 20 years, and it's really one of the jewels of our city and our region. What would you like to see happen to the RenCen? This is the question I really want to hear from listeners about. What would you do? Would you tear it down? Would you save it and do something else with it? Would you maybe alter the site and change some things and make it into a different kind of structure and inviting place here in Detroit? 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter and #CreatedEqual or at WDET. We'll be right back with more Created Equal. This is Created Equal from WDET in Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson, and I'm really glad you've joined us. We're talking about the Renaissance Center, built in the late 1970s to redefine Detroit's skyline and its riverfront. It has been GM's headquarters since the late 1990s, and they've announced recently that they're going to leave that building. They're going to move over to the new Bedrock Tower on the old Hudson site on Woodward Avenue. So what does that mean for the Renaissance Center? It feels pretty empty these days. It did even before GM announced what it was doing. It's going to feel much emptier when they leave. So what do you do with something that size with so much office space in it if it's mostly empty? We're talking with Kalea Hall, who's a reporter with the Detroit News. She covers GM. She spoke with GM's CEO, Mary Barra, yesterday about the move from the RenCen. Also with us is Harriet Saperstein, who's been a resident of Lafayette Park for 60 years. She's an urban consultant and community activist. As a planner and sociologist, she has worked for government and nonprofits, including the city of Detroit and for Highland Park. She worked on both the Detroit riverfront and Woodward Avenue in Wayne and Oakland counties. We want to hear from you, the listeners, especially during this conversation. What would you do with the Renaissance Center once GM moves out of it, once it's mostly empty? Would you keep it? Would you keep it the way it is? Would you maybe demolish the whole thing? That's something I've heard lots of people talking about these days. Or would you just repurpose it in a way that made it more relevant to Detroit and Detroiters today than perhaps it is? 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. That's 313-577-1019. You can also go to Twitter and hashtag #CreatedEqual or at WDET, and we can make you part of the conversation that way. Before we get to our callers, Harriet, and we've already got a number of people queuing up. That is not a surprise. When we went into the break, you were starting to talk about how all of this fits in with some other questions about downtown and about the city more generally, transit being one of them. I want you to lean a little more into those thoughts and share those with our listeners. The RenCen is not just an isolated building on the riverfront. It is part of a much bigger, part of the city, and it connects to all these other things in the city. What's your thought about how we ought to be reconsidering that now that it's mostly empty?
Well, there's probably too much to talk about in this short program in terms of that. And like everybody else, I'm just thinking about it since the Mary Barra announcement. But basically, we're talking about how the expressways change, and the people who are looking about 275 and 75 are just thinking in terms of car traffic. They are not really thinking about the people. They are not thinking about the fact that Lafayette, Elmwood Park, Black Bottom, as it existed before, and should be relevantly supported in terms of at least concept as well as probably projects in the future, seem to be still at a distance or all separate. So if we have to change RenCen, and we have no choice about it, GM owns it, they're going to move out, we're not going to be able to stop that. What do we do with those 5 buildings? I'm going to let the other 2 go, those 2 extra ones. But what are we going to do with those 5 to both reflect the new kinds of patterns of where do nonprofits go for offices, where do basically more schools start? We could have a school in one of those buildings. That might be very interesting. I don't want to compete with the Center for Creative Studies, but there's lots of technical schools that we could do. And imagine trying to bring then the young people that are in. Oddly enough, I just discovered in getting ready for the program that my daughter, who is now in her 60s, was one of the people that put a shovel in the ground when Renaissance Center started. She doesn't even remember that, but I found a picture that did that.
Like so, at the groundbreaking, right?
Yeah, the groundbreaking. But, because it's there, it is the image of Detroit. The carousel against RenCen is the image of Detroit that people have when we look at a positive image. There's lots of negative ones, unfortunately. And we need to reflect those positive images and make them even stronger. We need to take Black Bottom and the history of what we had, the immigrant patterns that came in, and make them apart. Why don't we get a museum down there? We talked about an aquarium down there. Cleveland has both. Cleveland has the museum. Other places have Baltimore has the aquarium. What could we do that would be an institution that would basically bring people down to visit and to stay and give them another additional way of remembering the past of Detroit, the present of Detroit, in order to build up the future of Detroit. That's what GM needs to think about. That's what we all have to think about, so that GM doesn't think only in corporate terms. That enough of a lecture for you?
No. I think that's great. And I think it's really important that you brought up the work that we're starting to really talk about more earnestly around I-375 and what happens to it, right? That's right next to the RenCen, and it empties out on Jefferson right in front of the RenCen. You probably can't. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm one who supports actually covering it up, as they've done in some other cities. It's a fortune, but you know something? That investment is worth it.
You would cap
the land on the surface in ways that we could get through and connect by walking as well as doing other things. Build on what we have. Don't destroy what we have to make the cars more easily go places. That's what we're still thinking about. Connect Eastern Market in a better way. Find ways to get through. There are creative ways to think about it, and I don't think we're doing it yet.
Again, 313-577-1019 is the number here on the phones. You can also go to Twitter and #CreatedEqual or @WDET if you want to participate in the conversation. Tell us what you would do with the Renaissance Center when GM leaves it next year. It'll be largely empty. Would you rethink the whole thing? Would you rethink part of it? What do you imagine is possible in that space? We're going to start today with James in Dearborn. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning.
Hey.
I'd like to my first class in urban planning class at Wayne State University. The first book had a picture of the Renaissance Center in Lafayette Park. And it said good planning and bad planning. You can imagine which one was bad. The Renaissance Center. But I think what's really super important about, and the guest was just talking about it, is how we connect it to the rest of downtown. What's in there, I think there's many ideas, and some of the ones that were said are really good. I think something community-focused that gives people a reason to go there and then go through to the other side. But really, how do we connect those two things? We've got sky bridges all over town, and we do have one there, but it's not used. Like, how do we get people to use that? Or how do we change what Jefferson Avenue looks like to open up the front of that building to be more useful? I think, what's in there, you could put a business or anything, but if people aren't going, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, James.
And without workers, they might not go.
James, that's a great point, and I'm glad you called. And good luck in your planning career. Harriet, the question about Jefferson Avenue, I think, is really important because I'm somebody who talks a lot about the 8 and 9 lane streets that we have here in Detroit. They're everywhere, right? Michigan Avenue, Woodward in places, Gratiot, and Jefferson there. Building the Renaissance where we did across Jefferson from the main part of downtown presented us with a lifelong challenge, really, to make it more part of downtown, to integrate it. What James is talking about is that no matter what you put in there, you still have to do some of that work. What could that work look like to not just integrate the RenCen more into downtown, but that part of the riverfront, which is so important as well?
Well, we're beginning to do it a little bit. We're doing a little better with the Decrindle Cut. We're doing a little better with Rivard. But basically, we keep cutting it off from the people, and we keep justifying in terms of cars. I am not a landscape architect. I am not a transportation planner. I have someone who's spent my life thinking about how do we make life better for people, for individuals, for families, for cultures. And basically, I've seen some of that happening in Detroit. So I'm going to let you see if you can find somebody else to talk about the landscape nature of this wide street that they seem to be making more difficult. I'm an ex-bicyclist. I'm not allowed to bicycle anymore because I'm 87. I've been around a long time, kind of thing. My mind is not 87, but my body is there now, basically. But we have to find a way to get people to be able to move. And as we're getting more people to bicycle and to electric bicycle, et cetera, how are we helping those connections move better without getting the car drivers angry at us? I mean, even I, when I'm driving a car, sometimes say, those bicycle things are making it harder for me to park and harder to do, even though most of the time I'm in the other direction. So basically, we have to really think through the connections that we have, and I think it could take a really interesting a weekend, a week, a month, get our various people to start thinking of the alternative ways to do this. You never know where someone's going to come with a creative idea that does have ways of being integrated into what we can do. Transportation has to be brought in. Those people just think cars now.
Yeah.
That's not the only way people can get around or should get around or will get around in the future.
Yeah.
Don't know
James,
if that helps.
No, that's a perfect answer. James, I really appreciate your call and your comments. I want to go back to the phones here and get to John on the east side. John, what's on your mind today?
So back in the 70s when I was growing up over in Morningside, it wasn't called that then, you could hear noise coming from down there, and I was an intrigued little boy. And I kept asking Dad, what is that? What is that? And they're building the Renaissance Center. So when they finally built it, I was bored one summer day, and I rode all the way from Outer Drive downtown on my bicycle, which was the crazy thing. The only thing worse than that was driving out to Metro Park one day because they'll run you right off the road out there. But I got down there to the concrete moat, we called it, and you couldn't hardly get in there. It was only made for people and vehicles. Of course, there was no bike racks or anything. Then I went in there, and I got lost for almost 3 hours. Panicked. Couldn't get out. Nobody could help me get out of that building.
Easy to do, right?
Fast forward to my working days. I work a lot downtown. We do work over in the ballrooms for different events in there. It is just the worst building to work in, to get around, to tell people how to get there. You can be in there talking to people on your phone, trying to find each other, and it's just a disaster. I say it was built by Ford, recalled, and rebuilt by General Motors, you know. But my point here is there was a study done about 25 years after it was built, and basically they proved that the Renaissance Center just created vacancies in all the rest of the buildings downtown. They lost capital, investment to fix the roofs and the windows, and it really didn't renaissance the city. It actually, and it was competing with the Hudson store for retail, and it literally didn't do what it was promised to do. And I don't see them keeping the Renaissance Center standing. We cannot, after pandemic, it was reported that only 23% of the workforce returned to downtown Detroit. There's just not the need for this type of office space anymore.
Yeah, John, I would probably agree with you and kind of at least err on the side of what you're saying there. I'm not sure I would go so far as saying we should get rid of it, but I do think that it presents a number of problems and has since it was constructed, and this is a chance to rethink some of those. Kalea Hall, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. I know you don't cover downtown real estate or office space, but this question about whether there is the demand for as much office space as in the RenCen is kind of looming large in the background. I wonder if Mary Barr said anything about that question and whether that has to, or how that is going to influence what they decide with Bedrock and the other folks who will end up being involved in repurposing it. That maybe there's just not enough people working in downtown Detroit to make this useful.
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing, what's happened with office space since the pandemic. We saw a lot of companies, General Motors included, adopt this hybrid, situation where you can work from home, you can work from the office. Then they got a little bit more strict with it, right? So now the requirement is they want employees to be in the office 3 days a week, and the 3 days are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so now what you're seeing is, and I know they're not alone in that, I think, other companies, including like DTE, are telling folks they have to go back a certain number of days. So think we're still in this hybrid situation of folks working from home and then also going to the office a few days a week. But yeah, I think office space, when I drive downtown, I live in Rochester. When I drive down to Detroit and I drive through Troy, I see for lease signs across, every single building in Troy. So I think we do have a lot of vacant office space still, right? And I don't know how long that's going to take to fill up, but it seems like it is becoming more of like the companies are slowly getting back into, wanting their employees to be in office. But when I do talk to executives, one thing they tell me is they have to be competitive, right?
Right.
So if their employees still have a lot of power because there's need for labor, right? So if those folks want a hybrid situation, I think a lot of times we're still in the situation where companies do have to kind of do what the employee wants because they are just trying to attract and retain the talent.
Yeah. Harriet, the caller said something about the competition between the RenCen and other buildings downtown, which I thought was very interesting. If you think back to the time when it was built, downtown was fuller before the RenCen than it was after in terms of office buildings. Was that a mistake, I guess, is one of the questions, and is this the opportunity to fix it?
It may be the opportunity to fix it, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure how to do it. I was looking at some old stuff that I'd written, and I wrote something back a long time ago that said, may you live in interesting times, because we all live in the burden of living in these interesting, strange, anxiety-producing, and fearful times, not just locally, but locally, countrywide, internationally. And then I think we all have to think about how we take where we are and make sure we make it work for the future. We need to deal with our history. Detroit is still a 70 or 80% African-American history. How do we get Renaissance Center to reflect that as well as the other thing? How do we get it to reflect it? The biggest thing I think about is how museums and places to visit like aquariums have made the difference. I don't know what we could do with those particular buildings. At least two extra towers should go down. But I'm not sure it should go down because it has become a Renaissance. And I go back to the Hudson building when it went down. However, if that competes with what we're doing as we go downtown, along Woodward Avenue, along Jefferson Avenue, maybe it should. I'm not the one to answer that.
Yeah. Okay, we need to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue talking with Kalea Hall of the Detroit News and former Detroit planner Harriet Saperstein about the Renaissance Center. We'll also continue hearing from you, our listeners, on the phones and on social. 313-577-1019 is the number. That's 313-577-1019. You can also at WDET or hashtag Created Equal. We'll be right back after a short break. We're back with Created Equal, talking with Kalea Hall of the Detroit News and Harriet Saperstein, a former City of Detroit planner, about the Renaissance Center and its future. We want to hear from you, the listeners, as well, on the phones and on social. 313-577-1019 is the number here. Call and tell us what you do with the RenCen when GM leaves it next year. What should we be thinking about? What is the riverfront have to do with this? What does the rest of downtown have to do with this? How would you reimagine all of this? You can also go to Twitter and at WDET or hashtag Created Equal. I want to go back to the phones here and talk with Philip in Taylor, Michigan. Philip, you have an idea of what we should do with the RenCen. Tell me what it is.
Good morning, Stephen. I just want you to know how much I enjoy your show, and you always have interesting topics.
Thank you.
I'm a retired stagehand, and I spent 25 years at the Fox Theater as the stage manager, and I've worked at the Renaissance Center since the late 70s. And the idea with bunch of my stagehand pals is to make it into a giant amusement park, carnival type situation and keep the hotel and make it into a destination kind of place with like a giant indoor-outdoor roller coaster and, just let the imagination run wild and realize that I'm not one of the people that can put up money for this kind of thing, but it's a big pie in the sky kind of idea, and everybody's adding their own little 2 cents into the conversation, and I think that it has potential if you could get the people with money interested in it, and the sky's the limit as far as what you can make into that place, and you could keep the ballroom for entertainment,
right? So Philip, I love this idea. I was in Minneapolis recently and visited the Mall of America, which is a kind of strange place, really. But in the middle of that mall is a huge amusement park, and there were people just lined up for all the things in there, even if they weren't going into the stores and buying things, which I'm sure they do as well. So it's not the craziest idea, and I don't know, it might attract a lot of people down to the riverfront. We used to have a riverfront amusement park in Detroit a long time ago. That's way before my time. But
Belle Isle.
Yeah, right. And we've got Belle Isle as well. Let's go next to Andrew in Detroit. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Great. I only recently popped into the program, but I haven't heard too many people mention, or if anybody mention, residential in the place.
Yeah. Andrew, no one has mentioned it in this conversation, but it's something that has come up in some conversations that I've had since GM said that they were leaving. The idea of residential, residential downtown is actually doing very well. There's a lot of demand for it. And what we don't have in great abundance downtown yet on the riverfront is the kind of housing that you would see in other cities, that very high-end owner-occupied kind of condo development. We haven't quite gotten there here in Detroit in large numbers. And I don't know, maybe the RenCen is an opportunity to do some of that. Harriet, I want to get your reaction to our two guests' ideas, amusement park and residential.
I smile at the amusement park. Residential, yes. But basically, we do have high-end residential. What we don't have is middle-income and low-income housing, and I'm not saying that just for RenCen. And by the way, when you say I'm a city planner, I worked for Highland Park for 17 years as well. I've worked on Woodward Avenue. And we have to remember that those things are connected. The Woodward Avenue riverfront, Jefferson Avenue connection are an essential way of looking at what we have to do or what can be done with RenCen itself. So I think there are 4 smaller buildings. There's one big tall hotel tower. We need to think of the different things that we can do with those buildings. We have to reflect the history, the black history of Detroit as well, because that seems to get forgotten whenever we put in high-income housing.
Yeah.
So that's just a little reaction that comes in as we look at that and the riverfront itself. Yeah. How does it connect to the rest of the metropolitan area? This is not just a city issue. This is a metropolitan area.
So when you think of other cities, though, and what they've done on their waterfronts, obviously the most direct comparison that people want to draw, I think, is to Chicago, just because it's so close. And when you think about Lakeshore Drive and how long that is, and what goes on along it, it's very different from what we've been able to do here in Detroit. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. But that idea of housing, there is housing all along the riverfront in Chicago. There are also museums. There's also stadiums and other kinds of things. We've really done that very differently here, Harriet. And I think what someone like Andrew's getting at is, go ahead.
Yes, we've done it badly here. That's part of the problem. We're an international waterfront. Have we really built on that? Have we really made an attempt to connect with the Canadian side? We talk about it now and then we forget about it again. But basically, we have an international riverfront. that basically connects to the Great Lakes. And no, we have not taken that into consideration effectively. We have not found a way to build on that as well as we should.
Yeah.
So I would hope some of the other people, the landscape architects, the sociologists, the people who live here start saying, here's what we'd like to see down in RenCen's buildings. Here's what we'd like to see. That makes it the core of our long international riverfront. The whole thing all the way from bridge to bridge and beyond.
Yeah. Let's get one more call in here. Chris in Dearborn. Chris, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Stephen. Just listening to your show. I just popped in on your show. It's fascinating that you're talking about the Renaissance Center, because I believe on your station, I heard an interview with the architect that actually designed that building.
Oh, with Portman.
The reason for that interview was he was notified about redesigning that building because people were complaining about the aesthetics, all the cement, and the place was a maze. And I think he said, he refused to do it because, frankly, he told them that building was actually designed to be torn down. If you notice the fact that it's all concrete, that is actually designed to be recycled.
Chris, that's interesting. Yeah, I've never heard anything from Portman about it being torn down, but I do know that he was criticized pretty harshly for the internal design of it, which is confusing, right? I mean, everyone gets lost in there, and that's not just here in Detroit. The buildings that they have that he designed in Los Angeles and in Atlanta, which look very similar to the RenCen, have the same problems. I wonder if that's just like maybe, the death knell for it in any way is just the fact that it's architecturally problematic. Okay, I want to thank Kalea Hall of the Detroit News and Harriet Saperstein, a former city planner, for being here to help us think about what's next at the RenCen. It was great to have both of you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, so Carrie, Philip and Taylor stole your ID.
We were all have the same mind. We're all thinking the same.
When we asked about when we asked people to play mayor for a day and come up with anything at all they wanted to do that would be possible. That was your idea, right? The amusement park.
I did want to see an amusement park. I don't know that I would have wanted it on the riverfront necessarily, but after I was listening to you all talk about it, I said, I can see that. Like if you make it kind of a round or be creative about the construction of this amusement park. I wanted it somewhere. I think the biggest thing for me is more public spaces for us to be outside when we can.
Yeah.
Enjoy ourselves, have fun, that type of energy. So I enjoyed hearing that, confirmation of my mayor for a day. Maybe I should run. No, I'm kidding.
You can't produce this show and run for mayor, so you would have to choose.
I would have to leave. Sorry,
you would have to do something.
This would be the end.
I don't think I support that.
Now, did I hear your idea?
My idea? Yeah. I actually don't have an idea for the RenCen right now. I'm actually working on something, but I don't have anything yet. I do think it's got to be rethought. I do think, that much office space on the riverfront never made a lot of sense to me to begin with. I think that should have been way more publicly accessible, and I think this is our chance to create some things that bring more people there for things that are for them, right? For the people of the city. So, I don't know if that means taking things down or repurposing them, but I think that should be the focus. I agree with Harriet 100% about that.
I'm curious to see, what if they get a new tenant in that building, what that might look like. We've been so familiar with GM being that part. It's been the skyline. Maybe this also, we've talking a lot about changing what we've seen. Maybe this could be the re-envision of something different, something new. We had a conversation, I remember one time, about how sometimes we can be very critical of what happens in our city. And I feel like sometimes maybe we could be.
We got to be optimistic.
More hope. Yeah, let's be more optimistic about what could happen on the horizon.
I think we got to see this as an opportunity.
Yeah. So we'll see.
All right. Good show. And thanks for joining us for it. That's going to do it for Created Equal today. You can listen to recent episodes of ours at WDET.org. And we would love it if you would go and subscribe to our podcast. Created Equal is produced by Carrie Jr. II and David Lines. The engineer is Nate Bender. The audio editing is done by Connor Anderson. And the music is by Sam Bobian. Created Equal is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University.